Hello, I'm Robert, a voluntary fact checker and helping you if you are scared. And this is about how China hugely overachieves on every climate change promise. And it's to help to counteract people who say that the developing countries like India and China are not doing anything. They're actually doing a huge amount. And most extraordinary of all is China in this respect. So if we go and look down here, this shows how it increases it on its targets. That's its target, that blue, that's what it achieved in the red. That's its target. These are the new renewables for every year, and that's what it achieved, that's what its target, and that's what it achieved. It always hugely increases on its targets. And then its renewable capacity, it's tripled in the last 5 years, and it's doubling at roughly every rate of every 3 to 4 years. It's in a rather regular fashion. It's basically, and it's surging as well. And then if you look at electrical vehicles, these are the passenger vehicle sales, not the ones on the road, but the amount being bought each year. And you can see it's been a huge rise from 2020 to 2026. This includes hybrid as well as totally electric. So it's sevenfold increase, I think I said, sevenfold increase in just 2 years. So at this rate, you can expect them to be all plug-in or electric in really quite near future. And then this is news just shared today on Twitter that this is one of the largest cities in the world, and it's 17.56 million people. Not the largest, but one of the larger cities. And it's which is already completely electrified its transport system, and without combustion engines, so not even hybrid. 16,000 buses and 20,000 taxis that are all without combustion engines in that city. So that's China. And then this is a new paper by Zeke Hausfather and others, and they say, and they're looking at the decarbonization pathways for China, and they says later in the tweet thread that they've got 1.5 degrees C or something they can do. And so in his personal view, the China or India's net zero pledge might be even a bigger one than the US Inflation Reduction Act. So if we look here at this is the amount that China spends every year on renewable, spent in 2021 on renewable. And this is the amount the United States spent. This is United Kingdom where I live, which is also actually quite good. We spend quite a lot on tidal and wind. Basically the sea and the wind is what we spend a lot on. And but with the Inflation Reduction Act, the United States is going to start surging there. It's going to become a very significant investor in renewables, and especially in new technologies, because China is also noted for this. The United States is noted for its ability for innovation. United Kingdom, we do a lot of innovation in it. So this is, and there's Germany as well. They've done a lot of innovation on renewables. They often criticise, but that's because they invested so early when things were very costly. So it was actually quite expensive for the economy, and but they certainly put a lot of money into the early stages of developing renewables, and we've all benefited from that. So the entire world is going to benefit from all the money that the United States is putting into renewables, especially since it's prioritising quite a lot of it to research and to better solar power, better renewables, and better battery technology. But if we then look at what China's done, then that it's already reaping the benefits of what it invested before. This is an example of Sweden, and it shows how its GDP is increasing hugely whilst its CO2 per capita is falling. So it's decoupled GDP from CO2. So we don't need austerity. That's not what this is about. It's about intelligent choices and investing in the right places. These are 32 countries that have got an absolute decoupling already, that their CO2 emissions are going down while their GDP is rising. This is United Kingdom here. Increasing GDP, falling CO2. And China is going to join that soon. This is China, and you can see its GDP is surging hugely because it's a very weak economy originally, and meanwhile the emissions are not rising that much, and with it under the hood, the renewables are increasing hugely in an exponential way. An exponential kind of surge very quickly, like for instance, like mobile phones. When I was younger, nobody had them then for a while. There were things you saw in films you wouldn't really see in real life. But before, first they didn't exist at all. Then you only saw them on films. And then you started seeing them in real life, quite big, clunky things. Then they got smaller and smaller. And then suddenly, there was quite a rapid transition from just a few in real life to suddenly everyone had them in just a few years. And so this is a likely thing to happen with renewables. It is happening with renewables. And this is India with its net zero pledge. So I talk about this in a longer video. So this is about the largest renewables in the world. Again, to counteract this idea that developing countries aren't doing anything. First of all, nobody should be surprised that China is the biggest hydro plants. I expect most people know that. But now if you look at these other things, this is the... So, let's get my glasses on. That's conventional natural gas. I just wanted to... Conventional hydro, the largest is China. Natural gas, which is not China. Russia's got a big one. If you look at the largest wind power, then that's China by far. Then comes the United States is next. If you... the largest nuclear, China's got a few. The largest coal-fired plants, so now this is the thing that often hits the news, saying that China's got so many coal-fired plants. What you've got to remember is that with fossil fuels, most of the cost is in the fuel, not the power plant. So China's got loads and loads of coal-fired power plants, but they're running at much less than capacity. And they're there because it's so rapidly industrializing. It needs to have the power on, it needs to get the power very quickly. And so you can build a coal-fired power station quite quickly. You can then get lots of capacity into it if you need it. And so it's a kind of security, just like we have fossil fuel security in Europe, because you can't ramp up renewables, whereas you can with fossil fuel. So you generally run a fossil fuel power plant at less than capacity, and then if you need lots of power, you can surge it up. You can't do that with renewables because it's so. The difference is once we've got loads and loads of renewables, then we have much more than capacity, and we start using it for industry and things like that. Then you don't need to worry about that. But until that point, fossil fuels are very useful, and that's why China has it, because it's a security matter, security of its power supply. And then eventually going, but the flip side of that is, because most of the cost is in the fuel, there's very little you can do to economize. And we saw that during the pandemic, when the cost of electricity went down in Europe, then fossil fuels were suddenly not able to, they were running at a loss, so they closed down. And so later on this decade, then it may well be that an awful lot of the Chinese power plants, the coal-fired power plants, are just going to close down because they're running at a loss. You can't, once it gets to the point where this renewable is costing, electricity is costing less than the cost of the coal-fired power plant, then you're going to be losing money with every ton of coal that you burn. So that could accelerate the transition quite quickly towards the end, like maybe the rest of later this decade or the 2030s. And So the largest one of the river hydro plant is in and the largest pumped hydro, that is very good for balancing the that's very good for balancing the grid. It's the lowest cost way, but it takes quite a long time to build. It's by far the lowest cost way. It's a kind of battery. You pump water into the pumped hydro to store power. You then let it run out again to return the power to the grid. And China is the largest of those. The United States is a couple of very large ones as well. Then, if you look at solar power, the largest solar power is in India, and India and China kind of vie back and forth on that. And so, and then if you look at and then with hydro, there's quite a few in places like Brazil. There's and in biomass, the largest by far is in the United Kingdom, and so we're kind of pioneering biomass and looking at what we can do with that. And so that gives you an idea of the renewables and how strong China and India are. The largest geothermals in the United States and the largest peat power plant is in Russia, which doesn't feature so much in these lists. Of course, it's not just the largest; it's also the quantity of all the smaller ones, and you have countries with lots and lots of small ones. But this just gives you an idea that of how much work the developing countries are putting into renewables and transition to renewables. And then so I thought I'd end this section anyway by showing with India how quickly it has increased. From 2016, this is the largest solar power plant in the world at present, until whenever some other power plant beats it. China might well beat it quite soon. But if you look here, then you've got 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019, 2020. This area of India is now 22 square miles of solar power panels, and that's about 57 square kilometers. That's a huge solar power plant. It's 2.245 gigawatts. Oh no, 2000, not 2. Oh my God, I misread that. Let's just see. Have I read it properly? Yeah, there's 2.245 gigawatts. Yeah, this table's in megawatts. That's in megawatts. Yep. And that makes it 2.7, but so there's different figures. 2.7 gigawatts, they make it in that table. I got that, so maybe that's a little bit out of date. So anyway, so hopefully that helps. And then we're coming into COP 2027, and I talk about this quite a lot in the longer video, so maybe I'll just keep this short and go and have a look at my longer video. I talk about a bit more about the renewables, and also talk quite a bit about COP 27. But it's looking really very promising. The especially two things that are really especially is the yes I'll just briefly say this. John Kerry's view is that we are headed, that we 1.5 degrees C, or not far from it, is well within reach. He approaches it by looking at that the 65% of the world GDP is already headed for 1.5 degrees C, and he agrees that it is feasible for that these pledges, most of these pledges are actually feasible, and we need to keep them up to it. And then so it's a matter of then of getting the rest of the world to that 1.5 degrees C pledges as well. Once the whole world is on 1.5 degrees C pledges, that means we, as the world as a whole, is headed for 1.5 degrees C. So in order to achieve that, then a lot of the problem is the funding of the weaker economies. So it's important to get a lot more pieces and lot more cash, a lot more funding needs to flow from the stronger to the weaker economies. And the good thing about this COP is they see the security value of the weaker economies having being both protected from the harm of climate change and of having renewables, so they're not dependent on other countries like Russia for their supplies of fossil fuel. So both of those had, because we saw all the effects of the Russian cutting off the fuel on the rest of the world. So their oil and gas supplies, all the sanctions, and we want to move to a world where we're not dependent on that. So from this security angle added to everything else, then the stronger economies are thinking, well, we've got to get more money flowing to the weaker economies so that they can join in and get their net zero targets, and also that they can protect themselves from the effects of climate change. And then there's the climate justice idea that the stronger economies produce the CO2 as a result of an industrial revolution using fossil fuels, and that's how they became so wealthy. And so that then means that from a justice point of view, and Africa had almost no fossil fuel powered industrial revolution, and it's produced almost none of the CO2 that is leading to all the harm that is coming to Africa. So that leads to this kind of justice argument that the stronger economies have a kind of obligation to to give loss and damages to the weaker economies for all the harm that the emissions are causing to them, so that they can adapt and be protected. And then that is combined with the idea that we need lots more money flowing, and we're not getting enough going to the weaker economies through the Green Climate Fund, although it is doing pretty well, but we need something stronger than that, more than that. So this loss and damage is going to help a lot with a lot more funding, and it's just the start of it now. But up until this COP, they were very wary about talking about it at all. COP26, they just started talking about it. This is the first time it's been on the COP agenda. And being on the agenda means they have to come to a conclusion of some sort. So this is really quite a breakthrough. And then the other thing that is very new for this COP is, it started in the last one, was the funding for South Africa, and various countries came together on that to help it transition from coal to renewables, because South Africa is very coal heavy. And so the idea is now to do the same. India, for instance, has used a lot of coal, and it is, although it's a big country, and because it's got so many billion people, it's got a lot of money, but it's not got much per capita. So they can do their occasional big projects in their spacecraft and things, but it's not really wealthy like China is at present, not per capita. So this loss and damage will make quite a big difference to India. But as we saw, India is doing these very big projects, but it could do so much more, and could adapt so much more with more funding from the stronger economies, which they can find much more easily than India can. And so they're talking about India. They're also talking about Indonesia. They're talking about and then with Egypt, there's a plan that's probably going to be announced. This will be announced in this COP. There's a plan of Europe is going to be funding 10 gigawatts renewables in Egypt, in return for Egypt selling its natural gas to Europe to take the place of the Russian natural gas. So that is a win-win for everyone, including the entire world, because Egypt with more renewables means less CO2 emissions. Everything like that helps. So lots and lots, and he also says that many more countries are going to come forward with zero emissions targets. And he says to expect a major announcement from Mexico. Mexico is critically insufficient at the moment, so presumably they're going to hugely improve their emissions target. So there's quite a lot to look forward to. I will stop this now. I say a little bit more in the longer video, sometimes some different things. Anyway, So I'll upload this, hopefully it's a little bit shorter.